What's up? Let's go. What up, y'all? We got a small, intimate crowd tonight for y'all night crawlers. We're covering Ray Bradbury's famous Fahrenheit 451. I just decided to throw this in here randomly. I've got a bunch of other works in the works, Huh. A bunch of books in the works. I thought I would throw this in there because I recently watched the film, and I'm going to talk about the film a little bit. 2017, 2018 film, with, Michael B. Jordan, homeboy Michael B. Jordan. But mainly I'm gonna be covering the book here, the 1953 work, and I don't know, it's kinda interesting that we haven't covered this work yet because it's sort of, I I I would say that this is like the 3rd arm of the triumvirate of the great 20th century dystopian novels that are prescient now, that have that have come to life now. I mean, it's now, it's Hellscape now. And, so that would be, of course, George Orwell's, 1984, Huxley's, Brave New World. Now, we haven't covered 1984, but we've covered, Animal Farm. We did Orwellian now, Animal Farm. And, we haven't done Brave New World, but, we've talked a little bit about Huxley. But that's because, JD has covered, 1984 and Brave New World, to such an extent, vividly. Stay vivid, they say in the film version of this, that and he's also covered Fahrenheit 451, but I thought we would dive into this, because it's prescient now. It's prescient and it's relevant, and, it's a pretty quick read. So I thought we would dive into it. And, and it certainly exists as a kind of, what I would say about the book is that it really has, a hellscape ambiance that I think that, a lot of times, the novelist, it doesn't really matter what the writer, we talked about this before, but it doesn't matter what the writer, the author, the poet, intends for the work. It matters what's in the work, and a lot of times, unintended imagery, consequences, and symbolism can kind of come out of the work, especially as the years go by, and it becomes so relevant. And I don't think that I don't know if it's fair to say that Ray Bradbury, intended for the work to be such a hellscape, but it is. I mean, it's complete with fire imagery. Obviously, that's the main symbolism that runs throughout the book. And it's also interesting the juxtaposition between the water and fire imagery that occurs in the book, when you read into the subtext of it, because in a way, the characters are sort of drowning in fire or they're burning in water, if that makes any sense. And the 2 kind of correlate. Now, obviously, fire plays an important role in the book in a number of ways, but even the title of the book, I think that it's always annoyed me that the title of the work, Fahrenheit 451, is always explained as the temperature at which paper burns. I think that's kind of like, I'm not even sure if that's accurate, if that's true. I don't know what the scientific, explanation of it is, but I'm gonna get into what the title actually means to me in terms of the analysis of the book, and also the character names and, what happens in the narrative because it's so relevant, obviously, to it's almost so relevant now that it's like, are we really even talking about this anymore? I mean, the book is just now. In fact, it's already happened. We're living in a time past the book. I'll also say that, there have been a bunch of great works that have kind of come out of the every work of literature, every great work of art is gonna have other works that spawn from them. It's like T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound, and then Picasso said that, great artists steal, right? Mediocre artists will borrow. And I think that one work that I think of just in terms of film that came out of this book is obviously that I really enjoyed, and I think it's pretty well done, is The Book of Eli. If you've seen that movie with Denzel, it's a great post-apocalyptic, it's a different sort of landscape. It's post-apocalyptic dystopia. That obviously is derivative. And I don't mean derivative in a negative sense. I mean it just derives from this work, without being derivative in the connotation that we can get it. Ortho Eric says paper burns at 480 degrees Fahrenheit. Thank you. Yeah, see. So I think that's just something that people I suppose, came up with the I'll get into what I think the name symbolizes, as we dive into the work. So please like and share. Thanks for being here. Appreciate y'all. Um, you can support me with the links. And also, just before I go on, I'm doing this as a kind of a quick stream. I'm not going to go forever on this one because for y'all night crawlers out there, I've got I'm going to be live on TNT Radio Live with Ruckus from Boiler Room and Joseph Arthur at 1 a.m. Eastern time tonight. And we may be discussing Northern Ireland situation in Northern Ireland's happened, so I'm not really going to discuss it here. But please tune into that. Also, I was on TNT Radio Live yesterday with our friend Hesher from Boiler Room. So if you remember the old days of JD with Boiler Room. So that was very, very kind of him to invite me on there. I really appreciated that. And I just had a quick little segment on there, but hopefully I'll be back and I'll be discussing some relevant things. I got to throw in a Seamus Heaney quote, which was, I'm glad I got to do that. But yeah, you can check me out there later tonight at 1 a.m. Put the links in the chat and also in the video description. So let's get into it. So the book is by Ray Bradbury. I just love saying his name. And shouts out to Jerry out there at Exposing Powerful Lies, because Jerry is a big fan of the Bradbury show that was on TV for a long time, and even mentioned that a while ago. But I'm not well up. I'm not an expert at his show. But but in terms of literature, we can discuss that. Shouts out to Jerry out there, and it's a National Book Award winner. It's, 1953. The origins of it are in 1951. So this comes, of course, on the heels of, first Brave New World and then Orwell's 1984. And it's interesting that as Jay pointed out, astute readers and analysts, basement analyzers will point out that Brave New World in 1984 sort of formed this almost like a dialectic. It's like a dichotomy between the two ways that the future would be seen, right? And they are, in a way, we've come to exist in a world where those things are kind of mixed. The two worlds are kind of mixed, but we're more in Brave New World territory than 1984. And one of the reasons for that is that Brave New World is and Huxley, um, w- I would say it was astute, but was, I guess, diabolical in the sense that what he was writing about, what he intended, it's a playbook, not a critique. And what he's saying is that the ultimate form of, we'll call it servitude, is where people, it's not that been put into servitude and that they rebel against it. It's sort of like what happens in 1984. You have this whole other society that exists outside of, the pod city. But it's like where everybody is in this and they're divided into class systems and they want to be that way. They love their servitude. They love Soma. They love the synth ORGIES. And that occurs in Fahrenheit 451 because there are parts where they will say, look, the whole thing with like the book burning, you think that it's like this thing where they start burning books and disappearing ideas and unpersoning historical characters and people, and then unbooking works so that they never existed in the first place. And you think that there's going to be this great rebellion of people, but actually, it's not like that at all. People are just okay with it. They just go along with it, and that is probably closer to the truth than than people are comfortable with. But that is true because as time goes past and more books are sort of forgotten and historical characters are relegated to oblivion, it's what happens in 1984, but it's like a purposeful thing. In this, it's like, no, people are just at ease with their comfort and they're sort of like their privacy and their rights sort of go away as long as it's in the name of happiness. And so what we have to talk about really is like, as Sam Hyde explained, and this is true, happiness is, we'll say, Skittles. Okay. And what that means is that obviously, people want to be happy, but the idea of like, you super chat Sam Hyde and ask, like, well, what makes you happy? And it's like, happiness is low down on the scale of the important things, especially for a man. Um, I think that and especially as you get older, you start to understand that, like, the pursuit of happiness, right? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, requires a definition of terms, that is, not easy for the normie mind to take, right? Yeah, shouts out to Sam Hyde and fishtank.live, which is, like, so radical, it's so awesome. It's, what a time to be alive, right? So awesome. So we have to determine, like, what is happiness and why do the people in what are they willing to put up with, right? In the name of happiness, and what really is happiness? I mean, is happiness like, uh, contentment? Is it contentment for where you are, with your job, with your place in life? Is it physical pleasures? I mean, that's what the system wants you to think, right? That happiness is your happiness and your purpose is completely defined by your by an appeal to the senses, right? By empirical data through, your pleasures, going through your daily life where you're just at ease with everything and there's no conflict because there's no backbone, because nobody believes in anything, because it's just this sort of nihilistic, blah society, like in Brave New World, where you're relegated to your pods, and you're happy with that because love is love, right? Well, happiness, I mean, in the classical sense, would be what? Would be your duty, whether you did your duty, right? Whether you served others, whether you served at the top of this really is whether you are fulfilling your purpose in terms of the talents that God has given you, right? Whether you are serving others, um, whether are you giving in order to receive? Um, and I think that those things are sort of in the periphery of of Fahrenheit 451 and Brave New World, and they're sort of it's interesting because they're sort of scoffed at, like in this way where you can see this now, right? And in the film, they do kind of a good job. One of the like very few things that they do a good job of in the film, which has Michael Shannon and Michael B. Jordan. It also has Lily Singh, by the way, as as the live streamer. She's not really even live streaming, but it is funny how it's 2017, so live streaming exists, but I do appreciate movies that are sort of on the cutting edge of pushing, a few years back, what live streaming would become. Like I like the movie Nerve. um, that wasn't a big movie, it wasn't like a popular movie, but I like what they did with that, and it wasn't a new idea, but I like what they did with it because that has become the reality now, especially, live streaming, um, out in the world, and I think that I mentioned this on the radio show yesterday that, like, the great there's a the way that things are so disparate, right? It's like ideas versus information, or books, versus the eternal, infinite scroll of TikTok, for example. And like, yes, technology is not evil. It's not intrinsically evil. It's the way that people use it. I mean, we're on technology here. We're on like I'm live streaming right now. We're on YouTube, and that's awesome. But it's the way that it's used, especially in the film, because the film sort of updates that. In the book, it's mentioned, and they really visualize it pretty well in the film, in terms of like people being glued to an infinite scroll of nothingness, right? And we know that remember when people started talking about the 24-hour news cycle, and how, you know, in the 80s, like you had CNN was like this new thing, right? You had the big news channels, you had like ABC, CBS, NBC, and then later Fox, right? And then later you had Fox News. Before that, you had CNN. And then my first experience, remembering that was I remember when CNN got a big break, like broadcasting, like the girl in the well. The girl fell down the well, and it was like this big news story, and it was ubiquitous on CNN. That was the place to go. And then later they had Desert Storm, and that was CNN. And then it became slowly like the 24-hour news cycle. And then I remember people commentating on this, You may not remember this, some people probably remember this, but back in the day, people would commentate on, like, what the 24-hour news cycle was doing to society because then it becomes this thing where everything is news all the time, right? And that means essentially that it's ironic because then there's really no news. Like, because no news is becomes news, and then it's just like the average everyday thing of, like, nothingness. And I remember, like, when Twitter came out, right? The big thing about Twitter was, like, what are people gonna tweet about? What are they gonna tweet? Like, what they had for lunch? Like, what is that? And that was what people thought. Of course, it's, data collection and all this stuff, like, but I'm and yes, I did see that, Justin. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I think dono.chat is down tonight. So, so I think that's, on their end. I'm sure it's, I mean, I know nothing about, about technology and all that. So, but thank you for bringing that up. But you can still, send super chats or directly donate through the other stuff. So, or you can just like and share the stream, whatever you guys want to do. Appreciate you. Thank you for bringing that up, though. Um, and but the 24-hour news cycle then became, Jay's talked about this with Internet 2.0, and then we'll have Internet 3.0, and everybody goes from when the internet comes out, everybody goes to the specific news sites, and then it becomes revitalized and refreshed, and things start disappearing. But then it's like social media becomes Internet 2.0, and then everybody goes to social media to find their news, and then eventually there'll be the next thing, right, which is like direct news through your chip, right? Or through your neural link or whatever. But that is in direct opposition. Shouts out to Jethro out there, my homeboy. Um, that's in direct opposition to uh right. And one of the things that happens in this book is that people start the as the books disappear, and the powers that be start to give the narrative, which we see in so many of the classic dystopian works, about you don't need to read the book because these books were about ideas, and the ideas led to violence, and the violence led to World War III. And in the book, World War III begins, the second nuclear war begins in 2022 in the book, which is pretty amazing considering the certain things that happened in 2022. But and the years are, the years are always can always be off, but the plans sort of stay the same. But um, but that when people, one of the other things that they do is that when people go and look at the books, for instance, like they show, like in the film, they do a good job of this. They show Moby Dick, and they said, "Do you need to read Moby Dick?" And then they show, like, a whale emoji and, like, a sailor emoji and then, like, an ocean emoji, and then that's it. So, in other words, the entire book is relegated to, like, a few emojis, and they say, "That's all you need to know," right? Um, which is the sort of complete opposite of Keats, right? Beauty is truth, truth, beauty, life, that is all you need to know on earth and all you need to know. Shouts out to Justin FMF out there for that $10 super chat. Appreciate you, homeboy. Um, and so that is true now. I know I'm rambling here. I'm trying to get to my point. But that's the internet. That's what you can do. Um, what they do, what happens now is that you notice that, and I'm not trying to be like the boomer criticizing TikTok because TikTok, I'm sure, has there are great things that are on TikTok, right? I don't have TikTok, but if you do, whatever. But one of the things that's happening is, like, people are learning their things through TikTok. Now, look, if you're like a chef or like you wanna learn a recipe or whatever, and like you get it off TikTok, that's like one of the things you can get off TikTok. Um, but and it's I'm not trying to say this like in a highbrow sense, but like if you wanna learn about Moby Dick and you wanna learn about Melville and what the book symbolizes, or like or Frankenstein, um, you can get the bullet points, I'm sure, and a quick recap, a quick, like, textual level recap in a 30-second clip on TikTok or whatever. But if you want to go deeper than that, of course, you could go to my channel, like, and you can look at my 3-hour streams on those and go into deep analysis, or you could read the book yourself and determine, what it means for yourself. Because ultimately, you know, yes, like, for instance, I'm here with my small, intimate crowd of high IQ people, and I love y'all. Um, so that I can, if you've read the book, we can share the ideas about the book, or if you haven't read it, then, like, I've read it for you, but otherwise, like, um, you people will never get it unless they read the book themselves, and so, I think that that's one of the things that's interesting about Fahrenheit 451. It's also ironic that, it's a book about burning books and unpersoning and books and disappearing ideas and the sort of oblivion of the past, through the quick recap of visual aids and emojis, and, like, then they make a film about it. Now, I love film, I love cinema, we love movies here, and I love a movie version of a book. I have a whole playlist about that. But it is interesting that they do a movie of the book, and it's sort of like they don't realize that the movie is kind of doing exactly what the book is criticizing. Because one example of that is that there are huge changes from the book to the movie, and some of those are great. Like I've just pointed out a handful of things that are great about the movie version, but some of the things that are a bit disturbing are, for one, the changes in the books that are mentioned. So what happens is, when Guy Montag, the protagonist, leaves his job as a firefighter, a fireman, um, and a bunch of the events in the plot happen. He goes out to the wilderness, and of course, he meets the people outside of Pod City, who are the rural people. And it turns out, this is one of the great things about the book, that the rural people are the actual human beings that care about sustaining life, and they have values, and they have a sense of justice, and they want peace. And of course, that's what happiness means. It means peace. To them, it means peace in terms of the peace of stability and peace of mind, and the peace of living outside of normie pod city, where all their ideas are shoved down their throat and they can remember. But and they actually embody the book. So each person's identity becomes a book. And that's sort of one of the things that I was talking about in the Book of Eli, because remember, spoiler alert, the thing in the Book of Eli with Denzel is that they are remember that in the movie they are after, who is it? Who's the bad guy in the movie? Is it Gary Oldman? I think it's Gary Oldman. They are after Denzel because he has the most valuable thing in the world, which is the only extant copy of the Bible. And then again, spoiler alert, plot twist, when they finally capture it, they discover it's in Braille because he's blind, he's the blind seer. And this is great. This is why it's a good movie. And then he escapes and he goes to the Outlands where he meets Malcolm McDowell, right? He meets Alex the Droog, who's grown up to be a wise wizard man and the keeper of books. He's the sort of quasi matrix architect, but he's not in a Masonic sense. Um, and he says, "Okay, you've got the book. Where is it?" And he says, "It's in my mind." Now it's Denzel saying that, not Malcolm McDowell, but he's like, It's in my mind." So he's memorized the entire book, and remember at the end of the film, he's saying, in the beginning, and he's transcribing the Bible. That's all there is. It's one guy. It's one guy in this post-apocalyptic dystopia. Now they do that in Fahrenheit 450. They obviously got that from Fahrenheit 451 because each of the people, um, their identity becomes a book in itself. But one of the things that they did in the film was, have you guys seen the film? I mean, it's not bad. Like visually, it's not bad. It's like very, it's like synth wavy, and there's like, the I don't know, the LEDs and it's got drones, and it steals from Blade Runner, which is fine because it steals from Blade Runner where they have um, the buildings become screens, right? So it's like they are broadcasting the ads like on the sides of the skyscrapers, and like that's kind of cool. Because it's cool in Blade Runner, like the way that it looks, right? But then of course it becomes disturbing because like when they start burning stuff, then the buildings just show flames, and then they show the constant stream of emojis, which is like really funny. I don't think it was intended to be funny, but it is pretty funny. But when they get to the Outlands and they meet the Outlanders, they say, "This girl," for instance, they say, "This girl is Mal's little red book," and it's you got to see who it is in the movie. that embodies the Little Red Book. It's a little bit, I don't know. I'm surprised they did that. Um, and then they say, "Oh, the girl says, "I am, Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon." Another girl says, "This is Zadie Smith," Zadie Smith, author of White Teeth. And it's like, "These are the books you chose? Why don't you just keep." Now, I'm not cutting on those books. I mean, Toni Morrison's a Nobel Prize winner, and Zadie Smith is who she is. She's a good writer most of the time. But what I'm saying is, like, why change the books? Why change the books from what they mentioned in Fahrenheit 451, which is they mention, like, Guy de Maupassant, they mention, Walt Whitman and Thoreau and, I mean, yes, classic works of literature, and I guess they're trying to update it. They mentioned, Thoreau, Emerson, they mentioned Sophocles, Socrates, Aristotle, Plato. Um, I don't think Tacitus is in here, but basically works from the canon. So it is funny. It's funny that whom they choose to, like, bring out Zadie Smith. What? I don't know. Crazy. So so um so here's what happens. Thanks for dealing with my rambling, y'all. Here's what happens in the book. So there is a guy named Guy Montag, and basically he's a fireman. And one of the clever things that Bradbury does in this book is he flips the idea of the fireman on its head, and it becomes sort of meta, and it's ridiculous on the surface, but actually the ridiculous nature of it is totally true and what would happen, which is the fact that in the future, or really this sort of meta present, the fire, and we haven't gotten to this level yet, but we have in a metaphorical sense, that the fireman is the job that entails starting fires, right? They are the book burners. And they point this out in the book. At one point they say the first fireman, in this country was Ben Franklin. Ben Franklin started the first fire department, and they change they they actually change the mission statement that was put out at the time in Ben Franklin, and actually we're going to be covering Ben Franklin soon because that was a sponsored stream. And we're going to be covering that Ben Franklin's autobiography. Um, but let's see if I can find it in here because it's pretty funny the stark way that he writes it. Um, but it's put to him as a question, and later on, Bob Montag will ask his boss Beatty. He'll say, "Is that true? Is that true what that lady said? Like, were firemen really in the past? Were they really did they really put out fires instead of start fires?" And he's like, "No, that's lies," because he learns that from Clarice. Clarice is a 17-year-old who is obviously different from other people because she questions why instead of how. So the idea of questions can, for me, are uh, well, I won't get into why I hate questions. I don't hate questions in the sense of a philosophical or probing questions. I hate questions in general in terms of like, I hate writing the question mark for one. I've always hated writing an actual question mark. It's an annoying little sigil to me. But that's my own personal pet peeve. But she holds the virtue of question asking in a society where you can't ask questions, and we certainly see that happens to be true now, right? And she tells him one day, "Yeah, you're a fireman." She's this girl that he meets outside the fire station on the way home, and she says, "You know, you're a fireman. Did you know that your whole job was different back in the day?" And one of the things that happens is Guy Montag, um, he he can't remember, like, not only the distant past, but he has trouble remembering things from, like, the recent past. And that's becoming ever more evident as the days go by now in the sort of, postmodern era and Great Reset that we Jethro asked a question with a million question marks, that we see now, right? Where, I mean, just look at the recent past, right? All the things that happened, like, in the last 3 years where we had a Fahrenheit 451 world, literally, like, literally that happened over the course of an entire year, and the I've it's just my impression, but the average person, not here, obviously, but outside, has totally forgotten that any of that happened. I mean, my example that I bring up with Jethro, from time to time is, do you remember the big event that happened in Beirut in 2020, in the summer of 2020, where the big thing went off and entire city blocks were obliterated in like half a second with a mushroom cloud of death that changed color as it went. It went from, it looked like a DEW that went from white to black to red with a giant demon bomb, right? And um, not only were people unaware of that at the time, and that's fine because people weren't dialed into the media, but like as time went on, they like still hadn't heard of it, and it took the normie news like weeks to catch up to that event, and then that's totally forgotten. Nobody knows about that. Nobody discusses it. And then the things that happened in the cities, totally forgotten. Nobody remembers it. We remember it, obviously. People here remember it. People on the internet probably remember it, but even a big portion of them don't remember it. Um, so Guy Montag is a fireman, and his job is to search out to search and destroy, to find people that have the most illegal thing in their world, which is books. Any books, they got to be burned. And he is in this department, Fahrenheit 451. He got his number plate on, and they ride their salamander truck, and they go and they destroy these things. Well, they get to this place where, they find the mother lode of books. This lady has a library, right? Now, this also it's funny that this also has occurred with people who may mean well, but are probably just too low IQ to realize it, to criticize people with books in the background of their YouTube videos where it's like, "No, dude, I'm just at my house and I just have a library because 'cause I'm a normal person and I have a library full of books, and that's okay." And the fact that you don't and you're criticizing that is disturbing, right? Um, and of, uh they get to the mother lode of the library, and it's this lady, and she's got all these books, and, they come up to her and they say basically like, "Look, you got a lot of nice books here. We're gonna burn them." Do you remember there's an episode of as a side note, there's an episode of American Dad where where, um, Steve is Steve is watching his favorite TV show, and it's pretty funny. The guy says, "And today on the show, we've got a nice, mid-century house complete with, Frank Lloyd Wright architecture, falling water. We've got a complete, to scale, model of falling water. We're gonna burn it. Next up on, Send Us Your House, We're Gonna Burn It." So so they so anyway, they go to the house and they tell the lady they're gonna burn her books, and the lady responds, with a quote, an historical quote from she quotes, I think it's who is it, Ridley? And, she quotes, something that happened, which was, um, Bloody Mary, when Bloody Mary briefly took over and persecuted the Anglicans in England, and there were 2 they're called the Oxford Martyrs who, were questioned about this and then were burned because, they had a copy of the King James Bible, and she burned them for it. And so the lady stands up, and in the film, it's interesting because she's got a, suicide vest with books. Her suicide vest is a vest with, like a copy of James Joyce and a copy of William Faulkner and a copy of Walt Whitman, and she, like, takes off her jacket, and she's got these books strapped to her chest, and they're like, "Oh my gosh," and then she pulls out a match, and she immolates herself. Now, this is interesting because this self-immolation the book was obviously written as a kind of post-critique of the book burnings that occurred in Germany and of what was happening in the Soviet Union, but the real reason that the book, Fahrenheit 451, is so important is because as as, and I'm not like saying anything. I'm just stating this is what the person said. I'm not an endorsement, but remember that Vlad Putin said the thing in his conference that time about the country in the middle of Europe that was involved in World War II did not lose. They actually won, and they just went to the West because now all of the ideas that they wanted are occurring. And so and the point of that is that it's not literally. I mean, look at James Corbett has done so much about this, right? The burning of Alexandria, which is the burning of digital Alexandria, which is like the fact that it's not that people are taking literal copies of books and throwing them and immolating them, right? In big, torchlight ceremonies and bonfires. It's that everything is digital and it's being unbooked. It's being unideaed, unpersoned, disappeared. It's oblivion. Even even the name of the company is Kindle. Now, obviously, Kindle is supposed to be, um, the kindling for the ideas, right? That's probably the way that at least one way that they intend for that to happen. But when the books are digital and everything goes out or it disappears, people's memories are short and it's gone forever. And if you don't have the hard copy of the book where you can see changes or say, no, this book exists, this is a thing. It's not available on certain companies and certain platforms, but it is still there and it still exists. And we live like in a time where this is the very beginning of this. This is obviously the whole purpose is that it's likely to happen. I mean, one of the things about the internet, of course, is that the internet is great for a number of things, but it's specifically great for um, disseminating information. It's all about information, right? It is a repetition of information. People program things into it and it repeats. That's GPT, that's all this stuff. But it takes human beings to come up with ideas in discussion or deconstruction or a philosophical debate or the quiet contemplation or as Wordsworth said, what did he say as the definition of poetry? The recollection of powerful feelings recollected in solitude. So, right, physical books, as Jason says, don't need a battery or Wi-Fi to read. Now, I'm not knocking the internet. I mean, look, I'm on the internet all the time, and that's where we use it how we can, as best we can. But that's one of the insidious things about the disappearance and the burning of books is that it's no longer takes a match and kerosene like it does in the book Fahrenheit 451. Instead, it just takes a delete, right? Or this book is unsuitable, or this book is WACIST, um, or as he says in the book, that certain people were offended or disappointed with this book, and so it was taken off the list. Right? Um, they're called salamanders. The group of firefighters are called salamanders in the book, and that's because the salamander is literally in Greek means fire lizard, and the salamander is supposed to represent um, the a creature that is like resistant to fire. Also, they have a symbol of the phoenix on their chest, which is obviously the the phoenix bird, which immolates, burns up, and then is reborn in its own ashes. But there's some obvious things from that will tie into things like the Phoenix program in the book. Now, not straight up Doug Valentine Phoenix program Nam era, but certainly with the way that there's a sort of psyop and psychological terror that occurs as part of the narrative of this book certainly ties into that. Um, and so what happens is Guy Montag meets this girl Clarice, and she sort of sparks the idea of the fact that like, do you ever question what you're destroying and what some of these books are? And when he goes to burn this lady's books at her house, he actually grabs a book and takes it away with him, and then he tries to read it, and, like, his ideas are sparked by this, and he starts to question what he's doing. He hands in his resignation. Well, actually, he takes a leave of absence from work, and he's like, "I'm sick," and, like, that he passes that off as basically like, "All I smell is kerosene. I'm high on kerosene," and all the people are described as um, all the firemen are described in a certain way, like, everything that they have is charred, They're like completely oblivious to the idea of like flames or pain from fire because that's all they deal with because they deal with blow torches all day and burning things. But also he sees this woman die, and they don't usually they're not usually eliminating people, they're just eliminating books. But when he sees this woman die, um, he it changes his whole attitude about life, and he realizes that people are willing to die for the things that they believe in, and that's not something in their world that they even would begin to contemplate. And then he starts to question, like, why they're so adamant about, like, having a whole society directed at burning all this stuff. And it's the same thing that they do in 1984 and, like, they do it in Hunger Games, right? They do it in all of the dystopian works, they say basically, like, that the past, and especially they point to the 20th century, is so full of strife and bloodshed and war that the people in the past were so stupid that they fought over like ideas and things they believed in. So now in the future, we've eliminated war by telling people what to believe or telling them nothing. Right. In other words, like one of the things he says in the book, one of the things Beatty, who's the antagonist in the book, who is Montag's boss, what he says is like, imagine that there was a time where a book told you that someone he uses the idea of free will. He says um, that people have free will, right? He says, imagine there was a time where you got from a book that people actually argued about whether there was free will, and then there's this whole other set of books where these people called philosophers would argue about no, everything is deterministic. We live in a deterministic universe. So these people are like willing to fight and first verbally argue and then actually like fight about things that they believe in. Well, and he says, "What's the solution to this?" And Montag's like, "Yeah, just why don't they just tell them one thing? Just believe in the one thing. Why can't they just accept that like when the state or the overlords or the experts tell you the one thing that it should be acceptable, that nothing else should come in your mind." And that's where we are now. And then of course, Beatty says, no, how about you just tell them there's no thing? And so they have nothing to believe in. And so now it's like there are no ideas at all. Who needs ideas when you have Soma or when you have like Montag's wife is taking these pills all day and she goes home and she watches the parlor vision and the televisor, which is like the television, or really it's like the infinite social media scroll. Which is interesting because in the book, like it does predict something more than just television. I mean, think of the '50s, and yes, there was television, but it wasn't yet what it became. Um, and it becomes more of like you remember in Back to the Future 2 when they go to the alternate, like remember how it's like the alternate Trump world? Remember that? Because Biff is Trump in Back to the Future 2, right? And so they go to his house and like they have the instant like nuke foods, and then they have social media and Zoom calls like that appear on the wall in the house. And that's like, I mean, that, what's that? When was Back to the Future 2? Late 80s. So that's also what occurs in Fahrenheit 451. Um, so he anyway, Guy Montag, like he takes a book and and then he goes home and he's on this leave of absence and he does this crazy thing. He takes out a book and he starts to his wife like has these friends over, these the old battle axe has her friends and they're in there clucking about their favorite soap opera or whatever. And that's the way it's kind of described in the book, right? To be fair. And he does this crazy thing where he takes out a poem and he actually reads um a section of he reads Matthew Arnold's Dover Beach. And like one of the ladies, I think it's his wife, like starts to weep. She starts to cry. And for a second when you're reading it, you think he's crying because the words in the poem are so beautiful and it like hits her that no they've never encountered anything so beautiful or pristine or transcendent or emotional like in their lives. Jethro says 89. Cheers. Cheers to you. Cheers to you, Jethro, for knowing that number. 1989. 1989 was Back to the Future too. I'm getting ready for my stream on Northern Irish politics on that radio show at 1 a.m. Please check me out there. Shameless plug. But but um actually she's crying because how dare he read literature? Like how dare he have a book? Because for one, they know that if he has a book, then they could be caught. And this actually brings up one of the other things that occurs in the book, and that's the DARPA dog. This book, I mean, it's amazing that I forgot um, that you read the books when you're young, and then you go back and you reread them, and you especially now that these things have occurred, and the book predicts the DARPA dog perfectly. Now, in the book, it's like an eight-legged spider dog, but it is clearly a robo DARPA dog that is meant to patrol the neighborhoods. And what it has is an extendable like robo tooth, and when it finds its prey, it's like a robo hound in the book. It's called a hound. I thought of Kate Bush's Hounds of Love. Uh, that's probably what they would end up calling it. It's, "Oh, this is a hound of love," right? Well, the DARPA dog, chases after you. You can't get away from it. Extends a robo snake tooth of fang, and it injects you, as it says in the book, it injects you with either morphine or procaine, they say, and it overdoses you and you die. And so it's like judge, jury, executioner. That's the DARPA dog that patrols the streets, and he's gonna have to get away from that later in the book. But so what happens is uh it ends up that Beatty, his boss, finds out because he's been snitched on by the ladies in the house and even his wife that he's got these books. So Beatty shows up at the house with the salamanders, and he makes Montag burn his own house. So he hands him the blowtorch and he says, "This is a beautiful house. It's a wonderful house. You're gonna burn it." And so he has no choice. He hands him the blowtorch and he has to blowtorch the house. Usually they like spray kerosene, and they talk about burning books. Usually they just burn books. They don't burn the whole house. He talks about how the houses were made fireproof in the past. And have you ever seen a house burn? Um, and I'll come back to that quote in a second because it's pretty brilliant. But what he does is he makes him burn the entire house. Now, in the meantime, also Montag has met up with an old timer named Faber. And Faber is a former professor of English who regrets that he didn't fight harder to against the SJWs and the people who were the book burners. He should have fought harder. Of course, he would have been one of the main guys, doing this, even though he's an English professor, probably. But there's also symbolism, obviously, in the name Faber, because Faber and Faber is the great meaning big English publishing company that has published many of my favorite poets. I mean, Seamus Heaney was Faber and Faber, Ted Hughes. But remember, T.S. Eliot, um, Nobel Prize winning T.S. Eliot, Wasteland. April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain. Right, Nam Sibilam, J. Alfred Prufrock. I should have been a pair of ragged claws, man, scuttling across floors of silent seas. As Dennis Hopper quotes him in Apocalypse Now. T.S. Eliot was the head of Lloyd's Bank and then also became the editor of Faber. And Faber actually is interesting because Faber was also apparently a match, like they made matches. And and he's called Guy Montag. I think this is probably true that he's called Guy Montag because Montag is a paper company. So it's Montag and Faber. So it's interesting that he's Montag because he's burning the paper. So he meets with Faber, and Faber actually gives him in the book. There's another predictive thing that occurs in the book: a Bluetooth. He gives him an AirPod, and they describe it exactly as they call it like a tortoise shell that he puts on his ear, but it's essentially a Bluetooth. You know that Bluetooth, as a tangent here, Bluetooth is a rune. The symbol for Bluetooth is a rune, and it's named. It was an Icelandic inventor, and it's named for Harold Bluetooth, one of the Vikings. So next time you look at your Bluetooth symbol, that's why it looks like that. It's a rune. Anyway, he gives him an AirPod, and so when he goes when when Montag goes to meet with Beatty and discuss books, because Beatty knows books. He lived in a time or grew up in a time where he read all of the books and now he thinks that they're all poison. So when they are sort of debating, um, he has Faber in his ear to help him with the intellectual argumentation. And so what happens is he comes to his house and he forces him to burn all of his books and all of his rooms and his own house, um, piece by piece with a blowtorch, with a Elon Musk Tesla blowtorch. Remember when he invented a blowtorch? I saw that on Pawn Stars. Remember when when Chumley bought one of those blowtorches? Anyway, um, and when he's doing this, it's interesting because his wife says, "Oh, what about our investment, our house?" Right? It's like, no, she doesn't care about the home or the fact she snitched on her husband. She just cares about the investment in the Coonpot house. And what's pretty awesome in the book is that at this point, Montag turns and he sprays Beatty with a flame of fire that engulfs him, and then he, eliminates the entire salamander group, and now he's a man on the run. He goes and finds Faber, and he's like, "Look, man, I'm really sorry. I don't know what I did." Faber's like, it's kinda bound to happen." Then Faber tells him, "Look, go and jump in the river, follow the river. The Darpadogs won't be able to chase you there. The drones will chase you, but only to a certain point." So he gets in the river, and there's this great scene where Montag, like, is in the river looking up at the stars, and it's like he's seeing the stars and the sky for the first time. Now, part of that is that, of course, he's looking at the fire in the sky because he's seeing the stars. And it's also a baptismal imagery because he's being reborn, and he follows the river, he gets out, then he finds train tracks, which are interesting because in the book they have, a what's like the pneumatic train and the boring company, that's building the high-speed trains, but it's, like, in the air, in the book, and so he follows these analog, you know, tr like analog train tracks out of the town, and he finds himself in the wilderness. So it's obviously supposed to be kind of a um an exodus where he is going to kind of in a way become a sort of a neo Moses within the book. And he's going to find these outlanders, and once he finds them, he's gonna kind of they sort of lead each other into the wilderness out of the cities to start a new civilization. But what's cool is that when he goes out there, he starts to see the glow of fire because he can there's this thing Montag can do where he, like, has a sort of a second sight, like, he's so attuned to fire and to, like, the heat energy from people that, like, when he turns a corner, he knows there's gonna be somebody there before he turns the corner, like a split second before, and he's attuned to fire and its glow, and he sees a gentle fire glow in the woods, and he realizes that people are warming themselves to the fire. It's so fire doesn't only take, it gives, he says in the book. And he sees a bunch of you know, people like Thunderdome residents out in the wilderness, like warming they're not hobo demons, but they're warming their hands to the flames of a gentle fire. And, um, and they're like, "Yeah, we knew you were coming because we saw the drone ships and we saw the Darpadogs, and we've been checking it out all on, our on our iPhones, and we're watching the hunt take place back there in the Coonpod City live. It's being live streamed here, so check this out." And they show it to him, and they're like, "Don't worry, they're not gonna come after you because if they couldn't catch you to the river, people don't have the stamina and they don't have an intellectual stamina. They want to be it's like the Running Man where you know everything has to be live streamed right now and they have to be satiated in their bloodlust right now. So if they couldn't catch you, they're going to turn around, go back to the Coonpod City, and they're going to find a scapegoat. And that's exactly what they do. They're live streaming and they're like, "Oh, we found the murderous traitor with his books, Montag, and here he is." And the drone like centers down on some guy who's wandering around, Cube City, and he's like, "Whoa!" And they send the DARPA dog. The DARPA dog jumps in midair, unleashes its fang, injects him with procaine. The guy dies, and it's all over, and it's all forgotten about. So now he's free. He's free, but But the irony is that some other guy has taken his place, right? So now it's like, yes, he's a it's a conflicted hero, in other words. He's not a perfect protagonist, he's not a perfect hero. He's also not a perfect hero because this guy was bad. He did this his entire life, and it's hard. I think that probably most people who read the book without realizing it are sympathetic to Montag because they go, "Oh, the guy doesn't know right from wrong, and he realizes like that books are important, and he escapes and he gets away, and he's gonna start all over again, right? And that now he's free." But you 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 stop and you go, "Wait a minute, like, that may be the case, but will there ever be a time when a person, is that slow, right? Is that closed off to the world where they don't realize that they've been the guy burning people alive? They were burning the books, and they watched the woman burn to death, and they don't know right from wrong. I mean, come on, man, you know? So, yes, it's admirable that he gets away and that he, finds what life is supposed to be. It's sad that he has to get rid of Beatty, but, like, the guy is the antagonist, and the guy wants to get rid of him and get rid of everybody and everything. And so the question becomes, like, the moral question in the book becomes, what's worth fighting for and what's worth dying for? And that's supposed to be the subtext is supposed to be that there are things and there are ideas, there are books that are worth dying for. I mean, there's a scene where he, he actually the book that he gets away with is the Bible. He gets away with, he says the Old Testament and the New Testament, and then he questions Faber. He says, "Is there any copy of this that exists anywhere?" And Faber says, "What are you trying to entrap me? We're on the phone right now. Frank caller, Frank caller." But he knows full well, and he knows that Faber knows that he knows that there isn't another copy. So he gets away with it, and his wife even at one point says to him, like, "What's more important, me or this Bible that you have in your hand?" And so you're reading it and you're going, "Oh, well, the wife kind of sucks, first of all." So and she also snitched on him, but obviously um, obviously, they live in a world without religion, and yes, this is better. This is more valuable. This is, this is like the future of the human race, and nothing's going to happen to her. Right? She's going to be fine. She's going to live in her life. But she represents what they represent, and he's got to get away, and he's got to save it. So, it's a shame that he has to that he has to eliminate, Beatty, but it was like they were put in a situation where it was gonna be either, one of the 2 of them, right? And so, there's and which translation there's only one, like, that's all they have in the whole world of the book. Like, that's it, and they don't even mention I don't even think they say, KJV or AV in the book. They just say it's a single copy of the Bible. So he's gotta get away, and, he is and now, of course, he's gonna be identified with the book. He says at the end of the book that, like, he is, I think, the book of Ecclesiastes and the book of, Revelation. So those are at least 2 of the books that he's gonna translate that he either has memorized or that he's going to memorize. It's also interesting because one of the things that ends up happening as a result of this, if you're clued into it, is that all of the bad guys are continuously quoting books without realizing that they're doing it. So there's a scene where Beatty says something, he had the scene about Moby Dick, and then he says something to Montag later about "There she blows," and it's like an unintentional. Obviously, Bradbury's intending it, or the speaker in the book is intending it, but it's an unintentional literary allusion. And later on, another character will say, "Consider the lilies of the field." So they are sort of, I suppose, unintentionally quoting Matthew in the book, and they don't realize it because they're unaware of what they're quoting. They don't know that the quotes are from something. Now, I think that probably every generation that goes by does this, right? Or at least until they gain insider discernment and are able to understand where their quotes come from. We all use language all the time. We use idiomatic expressions, and allude to things, so sometimes we forget where the allusions come from. That's one of the points of this channel, by the way, is to people all the time quote things, especially in media, quote from literary works, and they often misquote or a quote is attributed to them, and they don't they give a sort of misdirectional quote. Um, and again, a good example of that I've pointed out so many times, I'm like, proud of or something, is when we covered Mark Antony's funeral oration from Julius Caesar back in, like, January or f no, it would have to be February of last year, and immediately after that, like, the next day, remember, Lindsey Graham went on television and made the statement about, "Somebody needs to, pull a Brutus over there in, Russia, right, on, Mr. Poutine. They need to pull a Brutus," and it's like, surely this dude has read Julius Caesar, right? He knows what he's talking about. I don't believe that these people are I don't believe that they're stupid. I don't believe maybe in that instance he just forgot what happens to Brutus or the meaning of the meaning of the play in general. But maybe he was doing it purposefully, intending to mystify the normie, audience that would hear this and go along with what he was saying, going, "Oh, yeah, that sounds good." And it's like, you haven't read the play, but anyway, that occurred right after we did an analysis of that play. So, so Montag, gets away, and then at the end of the play, he lives with the Outlanders, and, but that's just talking about the narrative. The language in the book is incredible, and so just from just go a little bit further here to talk about Fahrenheit 451 and what that represents. So I think that again, people like to say, and I don't know where the quote is attributed. I was just talking about this, and now I don't know where this quote is attributed, whether it's to Bradbury or not. But talking about the burning point of paper, right, being at Fahrenheit 451. Well, some things I was just thinking about what Fahrenheit 451 represents, and so, um, yeah, supposedly it's the temperature that paper catches fire, but it's also the number of his salamander unit, and it's like a ladder company, right? When they talk about, the Big 9 event, and it was a 5-alarm fire, and they had alarm company number, 322 went after the fire. So it's salamander 451. Um it also to me, it sounds this might be a little bit too bookish, but it sounds like it's a self-reference. Like, the book is called Fahrenheit. It's like when you're doing a citation, right? Cite, reference, interpret. You're doing a citation for for example, for an academic paper, and that fits into this text because that's what they're doing in a sense. They're often citing literary works because they're starting from a genesis point of not knowing the literary work itself. And so when something is pointed out to Montag, it's like, no, this occurs on, in let's say Whitman 420, right? Or Fahrenheit 451. So it's like a page number or an author and an author's name, a book title or an author's name, and a page number or a chapter title. And that's interesting because Fahrenheit is both the temperature and the guy's name that gave the name for the temperature. And and it's also what did I say? It's also like it makes me think of like random number quantification of the Internet of Things. It's like it's like a random name for a thing with a random number assignation. Going back to that book, the book title and the author's name in terms of citation, that to me is like that works also because if the book is being referenced in a like a subtextual symbolic sense as the book would be called Fahrenheit and the page number would be 451, it's like you're reading a book of fire. And obviously the books are on fire in the book. That's what they do is burn books. But there's this constant repetition of imagery in the book of where he's talking about the way that books look when they're on fire and how they appear to be other things. So one of the things that he discusses is that a book on fire looks like a he calls it a black butterfly because it singes, it chars, and it immolates with these sort of phantasmagorical flames that come off of it where the book is split in two and it's like this. So it has a spine of a butterfly and it has wings and they become the black wings of a butterfly. And obviously that's like a monarch image because it's like the two hemispheres of the brain. So in a sense, life is burning and the two hemispheres of the brain are burning. And that can go either way. That can be that it's burning with the intensity of the light of ideas or with or that it's like Pentecostal, right? That it's burning with the flame of the Holy Spirit giving you words. There's a time where Beatty he refers to the lady's book hoard as a Babel. He says, "Can you believe they have that Tower of Babel up there?" And that's interesting because none of the other people in the fire company would know what Tower of Babel refers to. They don't read, they don't know books, they don't know, allusions, they don't know imagery, they don't know references to things, and they certainly don't know religion. So why would they know what that is? Now Beatty knows what it is, but why would they know? And also, it's like, to them, it would be a Tower of Babel because it's written in they refer to books as graffiti. And in a sense, books are a kind of graffiti in the sense that, like, the words are words are made of letters, which are symbols. So when you I know this is going pretty far, but, like, it is crazy that humans have this ability to look at a piece of paper and it has printed symbols on it, which are just ink blots, and that we can get meaning from that. That's very strange. Um, Now, obviously, that's a thing, and that's the sign of civilization. But think about when you look at a book in another language, or when you look at it in Asiatic characters, and not only are you looking at a book in Asiatic written in let's say it's in Mandarin or in Japanese, but you're also reading the book backwards because the books are written right to left, so it's completely um, it's like it's like antithetical to the way that we normally think about life, right to left, left to right. So so in a sense, that is a kind of a babble, but there's meaning in it, and the meaning is that God the Holy Spirit speaks, for instance, through Scripture, and they're talking about the book that he rescues is Scripture, and that the Holy Spirit is flame, right? It's fire. It gives you fire, tongues of fire, and the books are burning, but they're also at the same time creating a fire, a spark in his soul, in his heart, so that he's going to change. So it's a pretty complex imagery. I mean, it's a short book, and it's pretty impressive how complex the imagery is for that short of a book, and for I think that the language is, like, incredibly adept in this book, and what was the other thing? Also that Fahrenheit 451 now, in the world we live in now, is, like, reminiscent of a screen name, and that I don't think that's going too far because the anonymity of a screen name is important for the pod world that they live in, because people like, what is their identity? I mean, for instance, when he's talking to, his wife and all of the ladies in the house, like, they are you have a hard time as a reader deciphering which character is which because they all seem to be the same because they don't have an identity. They all seem to be the same. Their identity has been taken away because they have no ideas. They have no ideas, they have no personality, they all hate and like the same things, and they all are so quick to deceive. There's one great part of the book, I mean, in the film actually, where Beatty goes home and he opens a safe, and in the safe he keeps what does he keep in the safe? His most valuable thing is a pen There are no pens, by the way, in their world, but he has, like, the last pen, and he opens up some, like, rolling papers, and he writes little excerpts from works of literature. There's one point where he falls asleep, and then he wakes up from a dream, and dreams are important in this also, but he wakes up from a dream, and he's shocked, and then he looks down, and he's written on this piece of rolling paper, which of course then he burns. He always burns his paper. And it's a quote from Camus' The Fall. And the quote is, um, just to paraphrase, it's like, I never had a friend um that I didn't deceive. Um uh I never what is it? I never had a friend that I didn't betray. I never had a friend that I didn't betray. It's from Camus. And then he burns the paper. So that's what he's gonna do because he thinks of Montag like his son. Also, Montag makes me think he's Guy Montag, and he's a guy. It's like, Progress, he's a everyman. But it also makes me think of, like, um, Guy de Maupassant or Guy de, who's the Guy that was in, The Crusades? We talked about it in the Outremer stream we did. There's Godfrey de Bouillon and there's Guy I forget the guy's name. But in other words, it's like he's going to lead it's probably again a literary, probably going maybe too far in terms of my interpretation of it. But it's like he's the guy and he's the everyman, but he's also going to lead a crusade. And it's a crusade of self against the bulwark of society. And that he's Montag. I already talked about how Montag is the name of a paper company, but and I think that was an unintended consequence by Bradbury. I believe that's probably accurate. Um, because these things come out when writers write. But Montag also makes me think of Montague, Romeo Montague, right? But soft, what light through yonder window breaks, it is the east, and Juliet is the sun. Arise, fair sun, and kill this envious moon who's already sick and pale with grief that thou were made art far more fair than she. Right? He sees the light of love, and the light of illumination, which is the reverse of the flames that he's always seen, and that is the flame of intellectual pursuit and basically having a backbone, something that he can believe in, where he's willing to um, deny everything that he's learned through uh, pod his pod city upbringing and burning everything, and now he's willing to go out into the wilderness and to burn with if not the light of God, at least he's getting there, and he's going to transcribe the book that he takes away, which is the Bible. So that's what I think is the symbolism of Fahrenheit 451, the title. Also, I love the epigraph to the book. The epigraph is, if they give you ruled paper, write the other way, which is a sort of meta joke, right, about ruled or lined paper. Write the other way. Write the other way. Break the rules, right? The There are 3 sections. The hearth and the salamander is the first. The hearth is obviously, we talked about the symbolism of the salamander, but the symbolism of the hearth is important because he this represents the hearth and the home, and he's willing to the hearth has the fire in it, right, for the home, but he has no children, he's got a wife, but it's like he's living for nothing, and he realizes that, and so then he's ordered to burn the home, so that's interesting, and I'm just gonna read the first part of the book because obviously, the opening of a book is always important, and the first sentence, "It was a pleasure to burn," is the first sentence of this book, which is we could spend an entire analysis on the first sentence of the book. It's a pleasure to burn because they're talking about happiness and what happiness means. It's also pleasure, like immediate pleasure, right? Pleasure through the senses. And also he loves fire. They love to watch. They see beauty. They see a kind of Yeatsian terrible beauty, a terror. I mean, it's like when you watch, for instance, when you watch films of, the atomic testing, I think it's interesting that uh there is a kind of terrible beauty in watching those things because it's incredible how these things come to exist or that human beings can do them. I mean, the opposite of that would be like I was watching on Instagram. Have you seen the video on Instagram of the guy who drops the like cylinder shape in the bowl of like the colored milk? And he's like, "Watch this bowl of colored milk. It turns into a butterfly. Watch this. It turns into many shapes." Have you seen that? That dude's pretty cool. But that's what they see with fire. He says, "It was a special pleasure to see things eaten, to see things blackened and changed. With the brass nozzle in his fists, with this great python spitting its venomous kerosene upon the world, the blood pounded in his head, and his hands were the hands of some amazing conductor, playing all the symphonies of blazing and burning to bring down the tatters and charcoal ruins of history. With his symbolic helmet numbered 451 on his stolid head, and his eyes all orange flame with the thought of what came next, he flickered the igniter, and the house jumped up in a gorging fire that burned the evening sky red and yellow and black. He strode in a swarm of fireflies. He wanted above all, like the old joke, to shove a marshmallow on a stick in the furnace, while the flapping pigeon winged books died on the porch and lawn of the house, while the books went up in sparkling whirls and blew away on a wind turned dark with burning. It's a brilliant. So that writing is really good. It's very powerful. And one of the ways that he achieves that is through the cacophony of the language. Form plus content equals meaning, right? And so we have a fluid a fluid sentence structure that is replete with cacophonous imagery, which is supposed to reflect the crackle and the pop of fire being ignited and things that are starting to burn, mixed in with the liquid kerosene. So it's fluid. It's like a fluid river of flame. So we have fire and water imagery mixed into one. And the fact that it's reflected in his eyes, it means that he is the fire in a sense. And there's going to be a lot of imagery in this book about determining like how people are separated from the thing that they're doing. So, for example, like there's broken, of course, there's broken mirror imagery, and the kind of broken psyche, because his psyche really breaks through the trauma of seeing the woman burn. That's what shatters his image, his fire image of what's been happening. And it says at the end of the book, this is really interesting that at the end of the book, they say once they start their new world and they go back to the cities, all they're going to do is make mirrors and they're going to hold up mirrors to people so people can see who they truly are. Now, remember in Julius Caesar, because we mentioned Julius Caesar, and Julius Caesar is actually referenced in the text. That there's a scene where Cassius and Brutus are talking, and Cassius says to Brutus, "Can you see?" Let me read that exact quote. I've got it right here somewhere. He says, "Can you see? Can you see yourself?" Um, let me pull it up. Um, he says, "Tell me, Brutus, can you see yourself?" And he says, "No." Let me just read you the exact quote. Yeah, it's from Julius Caesar, Act 1, Scene 2, lines 144 to 151. Brutus says, "No, Cassius, for the eye sees not itself, but by reflection, by some other things." And Cassius says, "'Tis just, and is very much lamented, Brutus, that you have no such mirrors as will turn your hidden worthiness into your eye, that you might see your shadow." And that occurs, that exact quote doesn't occur in the text, but Cassius and Brutus are referenced because later on, when Montag will question Beatty, Beatty will reference Cassius in that scene. Um, and again, the strength of the visceral language in this um, really creates a sort of tidal effect on the reader, where you feel like you're being burned right away. He says, um, Montag grinned the fierce grin of all men, singed and driven back by flame. He knew that when he returned to the firehouse, he might wink at himself. A minstrel man. I like the alliteration there. Obviously, it's a minstrel man. It's a little bit spicy, but it's a minstrel man because he's been blackened by flame. And it's remember, he was just referred to as a conductor. So it's like he's a minstrel. it's in terms of it's a musical imagery. There's a music to the flames that he creates, but it's also that, like, he's playing a character that's not himself, and that is, um, that would be controversial in any other situation, but that's what these guys have taken on. Burnt corked in the mirror. Later going to sleep, he would feel the fiery smile that gripped by his face muscles in the dark. It never went away, that smile. It never went away as long as he remembered. Now, that's interesting. That's ironic because he can't remember. He can't really remember the past. Um, in fact, he questions his wife about he says, "When did we meet? When do we like, when did we meet? We met 10 years ago." And she's like, "I don't know, I guess." And he's like, "Do you remember what we were doing when we met?" And she's like, "I don't know. Let's watch TikTok." And he's like, "No, no, no, no. Like, it's important that we remember what we were doing when we met. Can you remember what we were doing when we met?" And she doesn't remember, and he doesn't remember. But the difference is that he wants to remember. And she doesn't. She doesn't even know. She has no awareness that she should even remember. Shouts out to Jason out there again for that super chat that you sent me before the show. Thank you so much, homie. Really appreciate it. I'll see if we have any other super chats at the end. And also, let's see. Somebody sent me another one. That would be Jason. Jason sent me $8 PayPal. Thank you so much, homeboy. Really appreciate you so much. Shouts out also to Thomas Henderson if he catches us on the repeat. I don't know if I gave him a shout out in the last one. Um, which was the keep analysis. But shouts out to you, Thomas Henderson. Thank you so much for that. PayPal. Really appreciate you, homeboy. Um, again, mirrors occur on page 8. He says, um, what asked Montag of that other self, the subconscious idiot that ran babbling at times, quite independent of will, habit, and conscience. Interesting that he refers to his own subconscious because they're supposed to have no subconscious life or unconscious mind or even a conscience. They're supposed to live completely on the surface. That's everything that they're told by the experts they're supposed to do. He says he glanced back at the wall. How like a mirror to her face, impossible. For how many people did you know that refracted your own light to you? People were often, he searched for a simile, found one in his work. Torches blazing away until they whiffed out. How rarely did other people's faces take of you and throw back to you your own expression, your own innermost trembling thought? My, this is the reading, the writing in this is so good. It's really good. Um, let's see. The bridge under. She was rational. This is page 48. She was simple minded. Um, let's see. Oh, he's questioning about the woman who died. She's nothing to me. You shouldn't have had books. It was her responsibility. She shouldn't have thought of that. I hate her. She's got you going, and next thing you know, we'll be out. No house, no job, no nothing. That's what his wife is saying to him about the woman that he saw die, and he's trying to talk to her about it. You weren't there, he says. You didn't see, he said. There must be something in books, things we can't imagine to make a woman stay in a burning house. There must be something there. You don't stay for nothing. She was simple-minded, his wife says. She was irrational as you and I, more so perhaps, and we burned her. And his wife says, "That's water under the bridge." "No, not water, fire," he says. "You ever seen a burned house? It smolders for days. Well, this fire will last me the rest of my life. God, I've been trying to put it out in my mind all night. I'm crazy with trying." He says, "You should have thought of that before becoming a fireman." "Thought?" he said. "Was I given a choice? My grandfather and father were firemen. In my sleep, I ran after them." That's the book right there, right? Frankie D says, "Hey, has Bazed ever done Great Gatsby? I watched it today, and some of the writing was just beautiful." Yes, Frankie D, I actually have done The Great Gatsby. Go back into my stream. I did it in maybe, I don't know, March of last year or something, and it's called Jeff Stein Effrey, The Great Gatsby. That was one of my most fun analyses because that one really, I think, got me going. That was a pretty good I mean, I'm saying pretty good, it was my own analysis, but, yeah, we talked about The Great Gatsby, in depth. We did a pretty long analysis of that and deconstruction, and, as I was saying with Frankenstein and, Frankenstein, Moby Dick, a bunch of the classic works, especially of American literature, that book is not in my opinion, of course, but I support this with reason, logic, and fact and textual evidence. The book is not what you think it is. So yeah, please check that out. Really appreciate you bringing that up and asking that question. Um, Go back into my back catalog, you guys. And actually, in the video description, I put a bunch. Thanks, shouts out to my homeboy Jethro out there, the best. Y'all, we're so lucky to have our friend Jethro. We are so lucky. We are so blessed to have Jethro, because he is my great homeboy, and he just put the link to the Gatsby stream. But yeah, go to the video description, and I put a bunch of streams in there. Those aren't random streams that I was just trying to get links to for people to watch. I mean, I do want that, but I consider like all of the work that we've done. A part of this is that we're covering the canon of literature, and that I put those links down there because I consider them prerequisites to the current work. And so, literature works like a big spider web in the sense that the intertextuality is all related. And so I think that I think it's fascinating how um, we cover a work of literature and it relates to all the other works that we've done, not all of them, but to the other works, in terms of the illusions and the meaning. So it would be good to go back and check those out if you want to. Um, he says on page 49 that he says, and then he shut up, for he remembered last week and the two white stones staring up at the ceiling, and the pump snake with the probing eye, and the two soap faced men with the cigarettes moving in their mouths when they talked. But that was another Mildred. That was a Mildred so deep inside this one and so bothered, really bothered, that the two women had never met. He turned away. That's so interesting. He's saying that his wife, Mildred, has another Mildred buried inside of her that she can't even access. And that's because there's this thing in the book that happens where he calls 911 or 999. He calls the authorities. They come, and it's not doctors anymore. It's like um expert medical people, nurses that come to the house, and they have this Luminate confirmed Luciferian serpent snake robo Terminator Salvation single eye robo snake that they insert into the person's orifice, goes down into their stomach, and cleans out all of the gunk on their insides. And this is in the book, it's supposed to be what you're reading into it is supposed to be like, okay, these people live on, slave slop meat cubes, and so it's cleaning out the GMOs from their body prison. And when it does that, it re-injects new teeter peel um, oxygenated blood into their brain, because as they explain, they say like if we clean out the insides and we don't, put new blood in, then the person will rot. But again, it's like they're already rotting, and the fact that they're doing this at all means that they're rotted spiritually. And so they're living in a sort of a transhumanist Kumpad paradise where they don't have to think about anything, and um they have a medical pod, a super snake that will clean out their insides for them. But the what happens is that the people who have any sort of insight or thought or are human at all are like, this isn't even my wife anymore. This is another person. It also took away her subconscious it took away her conscience and her subconscious mind. And now she's completely dissociated. So the woman that I loved, I don't even remember meeting. And I don't even know who she is right now that I'm talking to her. Who are you, Mildred? So, the other thing, yeah, it's a robo-rooter, as Jason points out. Yeah, the other thing that's interesting that they do in the book in the movie, which is, pretty wild because I couldn't believe that they did this, was, um, they take a bird, and the Outlanders have a bird, and the bird, it's not a phoenix bird. The bird is you're like, what is this bird and what does the bird symbolize? Well, the bird is sort of a self symbolism because the bird in its DNA carries the imprint of the library. And now we know that this is real. This is true. University of Washington. I don't know if they were the first ones to do this, but in 2016, remember pioneered, at least it came out then, that they pioneered this ability to imprint not only imagery, but entire chains of imagery and exact text, like an NFT, in the genetic code. So, and it's not only they can not only imprint. I saw this again the other day that they were talking about this, that they can not only imprint, for instance, like if you wanted to take the Mona Lisa or something, you could take the Mona Lisa and make essentially an NFT of it, and then imprint that into the DNA strand of a human or an animal, um, but they can also retrieve it, and it's infinitely retrievable. Not only is it infinitely retrievable, but it is they tested it now and they can pass it down. So, like, the person that's imprinted with, and it's not only a single image, it's now books. So, like, for instance, you could code the entire Bible and imprint that into a person's DNA as a kind of a locked storage. The person then can have children, and the child will have the DNA image does not change, and they can retrieve it. So, um, at least this is what they say. So, um, the reason they did this is they said that there's nothing more perfect and more permanent than the DNA strand, right? And so the way to pass on, um, to infinitely pass on knowledge is through God's perfect creation, right? The human being, right? That we're created that way, and that we have this DNA code where they can retrieve knowledge like that. And I think that's interesting because it's like you remember when they put, like they put the golden disc on the satellite and sent it into deep space, and they're like, oh, if we find the aliens, they'll find this copy of a John Lennon song or whatever, and it's like, who chose this stuff? Well, it's like, you don't need to do that. You could just imprint it into us, and we already have the code to do that. So that's pretty cool. They do that in the movie, and that's what they do with the bird. Um, I wish I had a link to drop for you, but I'm too boomer teching it to be able to drop a link for that. But you can search it right now, just DNA code imprinting. Um, just a couple of other things before I wrap this up. I wrote on page 53, my note was, "This is the Brave New World." Even the hard labor of a manual job in a factory equals come to be more humane than the pod life of a Gen Z. Said that because he says school is shortened, discipline relaxed, philosophies, histories, languages dropped, English and spelling gradually neglected, finally almost completely ignored. Life is immediate, the job counts. Pleasure lies all about after work. Why learn anything save pressing buttons, pulling switches, fitting nuts and bolts? Now that's kind of the attitude of the way that Huxley describes the epsilon class in Brave New World, right? And this is a common thing like in mid 20th century to talk about how life is meaningless because of like the kind of um the Ford assembly line of people working in the factory. But now we're in this new world, this brave new world where actually that's not that's not bad, right? Because people who have skills and who do jobs and do manual labor and keep things running as opposed to the robo technician, right, are certainly more manly, and more, essential than the coon pod dweller who is coding all day, and who is, injected with their meat cube at the end of the day, right? So even things move on from there. So we see like the meaninglessness level kind of gets flipped, in terms of the Brave New World of Fahrenheit 451. Um, but the point is that he's questioning this. He even says on page 58, this is pretty interesting. He says, um, cram them full of combustible data, chock them so damn full of facts they feel stuffed, but absolutely brilliant with information. then they'll feel their thinking. They'll get a sense of motion without moving, and they'll be happy because facts of that sort don't change. Don't give them any slippery stuff like philosophy or sociology to tie things up with. That way lies melancholy. Any man who can take a TV wall apart and put it back together again, and most men can nowadays, is happier than any man who tries to slide, rule, measure, and equate the universe, which just won't be measured or equated without making man feel bestial and lonely. This is what Beatty is saying to him. He's saying to him basically, do the simple things, don't think about meaning in life. He says, I know, I've tried it, to hell with it. So bring on your clubs and parties, your acrobats and magicians, your daredevils, jet cars, motorcycle, helicopters, your drone copters, your sex and heroin, more of everything to do with automatic reflex. If the drama is bad, if the film says nothing, if the play is hollow, sting me with the theremin loudly. It's interesting that he brings up the theremin and that he says essentially that this is really what soma is, right? In Brave New World, it's it's like a hallucinogenic opiate stimulant mixed with the synth theremin of their ORGIES in their soma ceremonies. And he says, people, that's all they want. They want their sex and heroin. Um, they talk about the two atomic wars since 2022 on page 69. Um, they let's see. The literary allusions are rife in this. They quote Alexander Pope and Philip Sidney. And then later, The Merchant of Venice. He says on page 103, the devil can cite scripture for his purpose, which is from Merchant of Venice. And that is essentially what Beatty is doing. He's a Luciferian fire character in this book. And then a great quote in this one that I loved was, there was a crash like the falling parts of a dream fashioned out of warped glass, mirrors, and crystal prisms. Montag drifted about as if still another incomprehensible storm had turned him to see Stoneman and Black wielding axes shattering window panes to provide cross ventilation. Um, so it's the shattering of the psyche and the crystal prismatic mirrors. And then when he finally eliminates Beatty, it says, and then he was a shrieking blaze, page 113, a jumping, sprawling, gibbering mannequin, no longer human or known, all writhing flame on the lawn as Montag shot one continuous pulse of liquid fire on him. Dang. And then finally, he says on page 150, they're talking about the GM, the DNA coding. And grandfather's been dead all these years, but if you lifted my skull, by God, in the convolutions of my brain, you'd find the big ridges of his thumbprint. Oh, beautiful passage. Okay. So, um, that's about it. That's about all I'm going to cover here with Fahrenheit 451. I think we did a pretty good analysis. I got to go because I got to get ready for my stream in just a little while. I'm going to drop the link one more time here. Um, that is going to be here. I think this is the right link. If you guys are up, fellow night crawlers, that's going to be on TNT Radio Live. And again, shouts out to Hesher and Ruckus for thinking of me and asking me to be on there. Really appreciate it. Those guys are awesome. So that's going to be fun. That's going to be at 1 a.m. Eastern time. Not sure what we're going to be talking about, but it'll probably be we might talk about the stuff going on in Northern Ireland right now with all the elites gathered, and the return to the Good Friday Agreement. Shouts out to Frankie D for that $20 super chat. Really appreciate you, homeboy. He says, God bless, brother. Well, God bless you too. Shouts out to our homeboy Block Party out there. Earlier, Blocksky said, mentioned to me about, did Mick Jagger go to the London School of Economics? Yes, he did. Isn't that crazy? Shouts out to ADH out there, Devotional Heart. And let's see. Let me make sure I got all of the super. I think Dono.chat is still down. So I'll ask Andy about that probably tomorrow. Let me look at super chats and let's see. I gotta refresh that. Hold on. See if we got any more super chats. Thank y'all for being with me here on this late night. What day is this? Saturday night. Talking about Fahrenheit 451. Ray Bradbury. Um, yeah, shouts out to Justin MF for that $10 super chat. Appreciate you. Shouts out to Frankie D for that $20 super chat. Thank you so much. That means a lot to me. I think I got to everybody last time. One of those was from the Marlowe life. That's funny because that makes me think of, did you guys hear about the new um it's not Kit Marlowe, Christopher Marlowe, but it's the new Liam Neeson movie with Neil Jordan. Neil Jordan, who did who did the Crying Game, which is an IRA movie, a British squatty slash IRA movie, and was predictive of. Remember, they used it for Ace Ventura at the end of Ace Ventura, but that's a Neil Jordan movie. And he talked about how, I read an interview with him, and he talked about how Liam Neeson has done so many films recently about playing the tough guy since Taken that he's trying to take him in a different direction. So that'll be interesting. And I think it's Neil Jordan, the art director. Let's check. Shouts out to Jason out there again for that. For those PayPal donations, really appreciate you, Jason. That keeps me going big time. I mean, I'm on my last pack of cigarettes here, um, and I gotta, before I get paid. So that really helps me because I'm gonna need that for the next week to get by before I get paid again. So thank you so much. And let's see. I think I gave Ray a shout out, that $20 cash app that he gave me last time. So thank you so much. And yes, and D Allman, who gave me $10 on Venmo last time. And so that's about it, you guys. Shouts out to Church of the Eternal Logos and Rachel, based homeschool mom, who did a good stream last night, and who were kind enough to give me a shout out. And shout out to them because I love them so much. They're both my good friends. Shouts out to everybody out there. Hope everybody's doing well and you have a good weekend. We may be back tomorrow for another stream because tomorrow, of course, is April 23rd, and April 23rd is Shakespeare's birthday. So I may bang out a quick Shakespeare play tomorrow to read. I don't know which one, and may do an analysis tomorrow night, but we'll see. But again, join me tonight at 1 a.m. With that link, TNT Radio Live, if you want to check me out. Otherwise, I love y'all, and and see you next time. Check out Sam Hyde's fishtank.live, and love y'all. That's about all I got. All right. Peace.